I never expected a single letter to turn my entire life upside down. It arrived on a random Thursday, tucked between a few bills and some junk mail. The envelope was plain, my name handwritten in neat cursive. No return address. I opened it without thinking much, expecting some generic solicitation. But as I unfolded the letter, my heart stopped. Dear Emily, I know this will come as a shock, but I believe we are twin sisters. My name is Rachel. I have spent years searching for you, and I think I finally found you. Please meet me. I need to know the truth. I read it again, and then again. My hands trembled as I clutched the paper. A twin sister? Impossible. I was an only child. My parents had told me that my entire life. I sat frozen at the kitchen table, staring at the letter, my mind racing. It had to be a mistake. A scam. Someone messing with me. But how would they know my name? My address? And if it were true? I didn't sleep that night. I lay awake, my thoughts spiraling. Every childhood memory replayed in my mind. Had my parents ever acted strange when I was younger? Had there been any clues? Nothing stood out. The next morning, I called my mom. Hey Mom, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. I got a weird letter today. A letter? She asked casually. From who? Someone named Rachel. She says she's my twin sister. Silence. For a moment, I thought the call had dropped. Then finally she spoke, her voice eerily calm. That's ridiculous, Emily. You don't have a twin sister. Are you sure? I pushed. Because she knows my name. My address. What if? Enough, she snapped. Someone is playing a cruel joke. Ignore it. Her reaction unsettled me. She had shut me down too quickly, too harshly. If it were really nonsense, wouldn't she laugh it off? Say it was absurd? Instead, she sounded afraid. That was what made my decision. I met Rachel. She had given me an address, a small cafe in the city. I arrived early, my nerves making my stomach churn. When the door opened and she walked in, I stopped breathing. She looked exactly like me. Not just similar. Identical. Same dark brown hair. Same green eyes. Same sharp cheekbones. It was like staring into a mirror. I stood up, my legs weak. Rachel stared at me with the same stunned expression. Then, without thinking, we both reached out and grabbed each other's hands, as if we needed to confirm that the other was real. Oh my God, she whispered. Neither of us spoke for a long time. We just sat down, studying each other. Finally, Rachel broke the silence. I've been looking for you for so long, she said. Her voice shook. I always knew something was missing. But I only recently found the adoption papers. Adoption papers? I repeated. She nodded. I was adopted. My parents never told me, but I found the documents. And I found out I had a twin. A chill ran through me. I wasn't adopted, I said. I grew up with my biological parents. Rachel bit her lip. Are you sure? Yes. But even as I said it, doubt crept in. Rachel reached into her bag and pulled out a folder. She slid it across the table. My fingers shook as I opened it. Inside were old, faded documents. A birth certificate. Hospital records. And then, my name. My birth date. My parents' names. But in the section for siblings, there it was. Twin sister, Rachel Bennett. I couldn't breathe. They lied to you, Rachel whispered. They lied to both of us. My entire world crumbled in that moment. Rachel had spent years searching for me, only to uncover the truth hidden in adoption papers. Meanwhile, I had been raised believing I was an only child. But why? Who had separated us? And why had my parents lied? I needed answers. And I knew exactly where to start. When I left the cafe after meeting Rachel, my mind was spinning. I could barely feel my feet hitting the pavement as I walked to my car. It felt like I had stepped into someone else's life. One where I wasn't an only child. One where everything I had believed about my past was a carefully constructed lie. I sat behind the wheel for a long time, gripping the steering wheel so hard my knuckles turned white. My parents had lied to me. There was no other explanation. Rachel had proof, documents that showed we were twins. That we were born together. That we were separated. And my mother's reaction when I mentioned Rachel's letter? That silence. That sharp, immediate denial. It wasn't the response of someone who was genuinely confused. It was the response of someone who had been caught. I needed to confront them. I didn't call ahead. I drove straight to my parents' house, my heart hammering the entire way. It was a modest home in the suburbs, the same house I had grown up in. The front yard looked the same. Trimmed hedges, a porch swing, the wind chime my mother loved. It all seemed so normal. But now I knew it wasn't. I parked in the driveway and walked up to the front door, hesitating for only a second before knocking. Not a polite knock. A demand. The door opened, and my mother's face appeared. For a moment, she smiled, until she saw my expression. Emily? What's wrong? I stepped inside without waiting for an invitation. We need to talk. She frowned, shutting the door behind me. About what? I turned to face her. Rachel. Her face changed instantly. Her mouth pressed into a tight line, and her eyes flickered with something. Fear, maybe. I told you, Emily, she said carefully. This is a mistake. You don't have a sister. Don't lie to me. My voice came out sharper than I intended. I met her. I looked her in the eyes. She looks exactly like me. And she has documents, Mom. A birth certificate that says I have a twin. My mother paled. I heard footsteps, and then my father stepped into the hallway. He looked between us, confused. What's going on? Emily thinks she has a sister, my mother said, her voice tense. I turned to him. No. I know I do. And I want the truth. Now. My father's face fell. He ran a hand through his thinning hair and let out a slow breath. Sit down, Emily, he said finally. I didn't move. Tell me the truth. Sit down, he repeated. We'll explain. That was the moment I knew. I knew whatever they were about to tell me would change everything. We sat in the living room, my mother perched on the edge of the couch, my father leaning forward with his elbows on his knees. They looked exhausted. When you were born, my father started. We were struggling. We didn't have much money. Your mother had complications during the pregnancy, and the hospital bills were overwhelming. I listened, my jaw clenched. We weren't prepared for 2 children, he continued. We barely had enough for one. And then someone, a social worker, told us about an adoption agency that could help. Help. I repeated, my voice sharp. My mother spoke for the first time. We didn't want to give her up, Emily. But we thought it was the best choice. We were desperate. They told us she would go to a good family. I stared at them, my chest rising and falling rapidly. So you just gave her away? Tears welled in my mother's eyes. We thought it was the only way. My stomach twisted. Then why did you never tell me? They both fell silent. I shook my head, anger surging through me. Do you know what Rachel went through? She had to find out by digging through old paperwork. She's been looking for me for years. And you... I looked between them, my voice shaking. You let me grow up thinking I was alone. My father exhaled heavily. We thought it was for the best. We thought if we told you, you'd go looking for her, and it would. Would what? Ruin your perfect little lie. My mother flinched. We never stopped thinking about her, Emily. I swear to you. But her voice broke. We couldn't go back. We made our decision. A long silence stretched between us. I wanted to scream. I wanted to cry. Instead, I stood up. I don't know if I can forgive you for this. My mother let out a sob. My father closed his eyes like he had been expecting those words. I turned and walked out the door. Rachel was waiting for me at my apartment when I got back. She must have seen my face when I walked in because she immediately stood up from the couch. What happened? She asked. I dropped my bag on the floor and let out a bitter laugh. They admitted it. Rachel inhaled sharply. What did they say? I told her everything. The financial struggles. The adoption agency. The choice they made. Rachel listened in silence, her hands clenched into fists. And they never once tried to find me, she asked quietly. I swallowed. No. She let out a slow breath. Well, at least we found each other. That was the only thing keeping me from completely falling apart. I looked at her, the sister I never knew I had, the person who shared my face, my blood. And for the first time since this all started, I knew one thing for sure. Rachel and I were in this together now. Rachel and I spent the next few days in a daze. Neither of us knew what to do with the information we had. Our parents had given her away under the pretense of financial hardship, and yet something about their explanation felt off. The guilt in their eyes, the way they avoided certain questions, it didn't add up. Rachel had grown up in foster care before being adopted at the age of 5. She had never felt truly wanted, never felt like she belonged. Meanwhile, I had grown up in a stable, loving household, completely unaware that my twin sister was out there wondering why she had been cast aside. It wasn't fair. We deserved the truth. And we weren't going to stop until we got it. It was Rachel who brought up Aunt Linda. She might know something, she said. Linda was my father's older sister. She had always been the black sheep of the family. Never married, never settled down. She lived alone in a small house just outside of town, surrounded by cats and piles of old newspapers. My parents rarely spoke about her, and whenever they did, it was in hushed tones, like she was some embarrassing secret. I hadn't seen her in years. But she was still family. And if anyone in our family had nothing to lose by spilling the truth, it was Linda. We found her number online and called. The phone rang several times before she answered. Her voice was sharp, wary. Who is this? Aunt Linda, it's Emily. Emily Carter. Silence. Then, well, that's a name I haven't heard in a long time. I hesitated. I need to talk to you. It's important. It's about my sister. Another pause. Your sister. Her voice dropped. So you finally found out. Rachel and I exchanged a look. You knew? I asked. Linda sighed. Of course I knew. Meet me at my house. Now. She hung up. Linda's house was just as I remembered. Cluttered and chaotic. The living room was stacked with books and half-empty teacups, the walls lined with old family portraits. She sat in a creaky armchair, eyeing us both with an unreadable expression. You look just like your mother, she said, lighting a cigarette. Both of you. Rachel crossed her arms. We're here for answers. Linda exhaled a cloud of smoke. I figured as much. She leaned forward, studying us carefully. I always knew this day would come. Your parents are liars, girls. That whole story about money problems? Bullshit. My heart pounded. Then why? Why did they give Rachel away? Linda tapped her cigarette against an ashtray, her lips curling in a bitter smile. Because of your grandfather's inheritance. I blinked. What? She let out a humorless laugh. Oh, they didn't tell you that part, did they? Rachel shifted uncomfortably. What does an inheritance have to do with anything? Linda sighed. Your grandfather, Jonathan Carter, was rich. Filthy rich. But he was also old-fashioned. He had this ridiculous belief that large families led to financial recklessness. So when he wrote his will, he included a condition. His fortune would only go to his children if they proved they were a stable, responsible family. And to him, that meant one child only. The room fell silent. Rachel looked as stunned as I felt. I gripped the edge of my chair. Are you saying they gave Rachel away so they could get money? Linda nodded. The second they found out your mom was having twins, they panicked. If they kept both of you, they'd lose millions. So they made a choice. I felt sick. Rachel's hands balled into fists. And no one stopped them? Linda scoffed. I tried. I told them it was cruel. But they didn't listen. Your father convinced himself it was the only way. Your mother went along with it. And when your grandfather died, they inherited everything. I felt like I was going to vomit. How much? I whispered. Linda's eyes darkened. $20 million. Rachel inhaled sharply. I stood up so fast my chair nearly toppled over. They sold you for $20 million, I said, my voice shaking. Rachel's face was pale, her jaw tight. They let me grow up alone. In foster care. While they lived in luxury. Linda sighed. I wish I could tell you they regretted it. But they didn't. Once they got the money, they pretended you never existed. I couldn't breathe. This wasn't just about desperation. This wasn't about survival. It was greed. Pure cold, calculated greed. Rachel clenched her fists. They stole my life from me. Linda nodded. And now you know the truth. So what are you going to do about it? I turned to Rachel, my pulse pounding. We're going to make them pay. Rachel and I didn't waste any time. After leaving Aunt Linda's house, we drove straight to our parents' home. Neither of us spoke much on the way. There was nothing left to say. We both knew this confrontation was inevitable. I gripped the steering wheel so hard my knuckles turned white. My mind raced, replaying every moment of my childhood. Every time my parents had told me they loved me. Every time they had acted like we were the perfect, happy family. How could they have smiled at me, hugged me, raised me, knowing what they had done? And Rachel, God, Rachel had spent years alone, bouncing between foster homes, wondering why no one wanted her, all while her parents lived comfortably on the money they had essentially sold her for. I swallowed the lump in my throat. This was going to be ugly. When we pulled up in front of the house, I'd barely turned off the engine before Rachel threw open her door and stormed toward the front steps. I scrambled to catch up, my heart pounding. She didn't bother knocking. She pounded on the door with both fists. Open the door, she shouted. We know everything. There was movement inside. Footsteps, hushed voices. A few seconds later, my mother cracked the door open, her face pale. Rachel, she breathed, as if seeing a ghost. Her eyes darted to me. Emily, what's going on? I shoved past her, stepping into the house. Rachel followed, slamming the door behind us. We talked to Aunt Linda, I said, my voice sharp. She told us everything. My mother stiffened. From the living room, my father appeared. His expression darkened the moment he saw Rachel. What the hell is this? Rachel let out a bitter laugh. Oh, you know exactly what this is. My mother swallowed hard. Girls, please. Don't call me that, Rachel snapped. I am not your daughter. The words hung in the air like a knife. My mother flinched, pressing a hand to her mouth. My father's jaw tightened. I pulled the folder from my bag and threw it onto the coffee table. Adoption records. Birth certificates. Proof. Explain this, I demanded. Explain how you could give away your own child for money. My mother's lip trembled. My father looked away. You lied to me my entire life, I continued, my voice shaking. You let Rachel grow up alone. You stole her life from her. And for what? For a fortune. My father exhaled sharply, rubbing his temples. It wasn't that simple, Emily. Then explain it to me, I shot back. My mother sank onto the couch, her face crumpling. I wanted to keep you both, she whispered. I did. But your father. She stopped herself, shaking her head. Rachel's eyes flashed. Oh, don't you dare try to make yourself the victim now. Tears rolled down my mother's cheeks. You don't understand what it was like. We were drowning in debt. And then, when my father died, his will changed everything. We found out about the inheritance clause, and suddenly, everything we had worked for, our future, our home, it was all in jeopardy. So you threw me away, Rachel spat. Like garbage. My mother sobbed. I never wanted to. I cried for months after you were gone. I thought about you every single day. I wanted to find you, but your father, he wouldn't allow it. He said we had to move on. Rachel turned to my father. And you? You have nothing to say. He set his jaw. I did what was best for my family. Rachel let out a sharp laugh. Your family? You mean your bank account? My father's expression darkened. We gave you a chance at a better life. A fresh start. A better life? Rachel repeated, her voice rising. Do you have any idea what my childhood was like? I was in foster care until I was 5. You dumped me into a system where I was just another forgotten kid. Do you know what it's like to wonder why your parents didn't want you? My father had the audacity to look uncomfortable. You ended up fine. Rachel's face twisted in rage. Fine. Her voice broke. I wasn't fine. I was alone. Tears burned behind my eyes. I had never seen Rachel cry before. She was tough, so much tougher than me. But now she was breaking. And I hated my parents for it. You could have had us both, I said, my voice quieter now but still shaking with fury. You should have had us both. But you chose money over your own daughter. And now you don't even have the decency to admit what you did was monstrous. My mother wiped at her face. I regretted it every day, she whispered. But what could I do? It was too late. We couldn't take it back. Rachel shook her head. No, you didn't regret it. If you did, you would have looked for me. You would have fought for me. But you didn't. You let me suffer, and you spent your blood money like it didn't cost you anything. My father sighed, shaking his head. This conversation is pointless. Rachel stared at him, her eyes cold. You're a coward. He didn't respond. I turned to my mother, giving her one last chance. If you really regretted it, I said slowly, you would have told me the truth. But you didn't. And now it's too late. She let out a broken sob, but I didn't care. Rachel and I exchanged a look. We didn't need to say anything. We were done. Without another word, we turned and walked out of the house. They didn't stop us. When we got to the car, Rachel exhaled sharply, running a hand through her hair. I can't believe we ever shared blood with those people. I looked back at the house, the home I had grown up in, the place that had once felt safe. It was nothing to me now. I don't want to see them again, I said quietly. Rachel nodded. Good. I reached for her hand, squeezing it. We have each other now. That's all that matters. For the first time since this nightmare started, Rachel smiled. And with that, we drove away, leaving our parents and their lies behind us. Rachel and I didn't look back. After cutting ties with our parents, we were left with an emptiness that neither of us knew how to fill. It was strange, knowing that the people who had raised me, the ones I had called mom and dad my entire life, were now nothing more than strangers. But it wasn't just about them. It was about what they had taken from us. Rachel had spent years searching for the truth, hoping for a family, only to find out she had been discarded for a paycheck. And I had to come to terms with the fact that my entire childhood had been built on a lie. We needed to heal. But neither of us knew how to start. The first few weeks were hard. Rachel moved in with me temporarily, since she had been staying in a small rental while searching for answers about her past. My one-bedroom apartment wasn't exactly spacious, but we made it work. It was awkward at first. We were still strangers in so many ways. We had spent 27 years apart, living completely different lives. I was used to my routines, my space. Rachel was used to fending for herself. There were moments when I worried that we wouldn't be able to bridge the gap, that we were too different. Then, one night, after a particularly rough day, I found her sitting on the floor of my living room, a half-empty bottle of wine between her legs. She looked up at me, her expression tired. I don't know how to do this, she admitted. I sat down beside her, grabbing the bottle and taking a sip. Me neither. We sat there in silence for a while. Then she sighed. You know what's crazy? I used to imagine meeting you. I used to dream about this perfect reunion, like something out of a movie. She let out a bitter laugh. I thought maybe our parents had lost me. Or maybe they had spent years trying to find me. Just like I was trying to find you. My chest ached. I hate them, she continued, her voice raw. And I hate that I want to forgive them, even after everything they did. I understood that feeling too well. I reached over and took her hand. They don't get to define us anymore, I said quietly. Rachel looked at me, really looked at me, and for the first time, I felt like we were truly in this together. We started therapy the following week. I wasn't sure what to expect, but I knew we couldn't get through this alone. Rachel was hesitant at first. She had spent most of her life dealing with things on her own, and opening up to a stranger wasn't easy for her. But Dr. Patel, our therapist, was patient. She helped us unpack everything. The betrayal, the anger, the grief for a childhood we should have had together. You don't have to forgive them, Dr. Patel told us one day. Forgiveness is not a requirement for healing. Rachel exhaled slowly. Then why does it still hurt so much? Because you lost something, Dr. Patel said gently. And grief doesn't disappear overnight. She was right. This wasn't something we could just get over. But at least for the first time, we were moving forward. As the months passed, Rachel and I began to build our own traditions. We celebrated our first birthday together, something we had never been able to do before. We went all out, throwing a huge party at a bar downtown with the few friends we had managed to make together. It was chaotic, messy, and perfect. For Thanksgiving, we ignored the traditional family gathering and instead cooked a ridiculous amount of food in my tiny kitchen, nearly setting off the fire alarm in the process. We invited Linda, who, despite her bluntness, had been a surprising source of comfort through all of this. She showed up with a bottle of whiskey and a homemade pie, shaking her head at our disastrous attempt at a turkey. You two are hopeless, she muttered, but I could see the small smile on her face. Christmas came, and instead of dwelling on what we had lost, we made new memories. We got a tree, decorated my apartment, and exchanged gifts. Nothing expensive, just small, meaningful things. Rachel got me a necklace with our birthstones. I got her a leather journal, knowing how much she liked to write things down but never shared them with anyone. We were still figuring things out. But for the first time, it felt like we were finally choosing our family. Then the letter arrived. It came in a thick white envelope, my name scrawled across the front in my mother's handwriting. I almost threw it away without opening it, but curiosity got the best of me. Rachel sat beside me as I unfolded the letter. Emily, Rachel, I know we don't deserve your forgiveness. I know we failed you both in ways we can never fix. But I need you to know that I have never stopped thinking about you. I have never stopped regretting what we did. There is no excuse for our choices. I wish I could undo them, but I can't. All I can do is tell you how sorry I am. I hope one day you can find it in your hearts to let us back in. We love you both always. Even if you don't believe it. Mom. I stared at the letter for a long time. Rachel let out a sharp breath. You don't actually believe this, do you? I shook my head. No. It's too late for that. She leaned back against the couch. Good. Because I don't want them in our lives. Neither did I. They had made their choice 27 years ago. And now we were making ours. We didn't respond. We didn't need to. A year passed, and things finally started feeling normal. Rachel got a new job as a social worker, determined to help kids who had gone through what she had. I finally left my old corporate job and started my own small business, something I had always been too afraid to do before. We made friends. We built relationships. We found people who truly cared about us. And in the end, we realized something important. Family isn't about blood. It's about who stands by you, who chooses you. Rachel and I chose each other. And that was all we needed.